It was exactly 2:00 in the afternoon. The sun was blazing down on the pitch, casting long, sharp shadows across the grass. This was it, the moment football fans around the globe had been waiting for months. The group stage drama was officially over, and the very first knockout match of the entire World Cup was kicking off. This is the exact point in the tournament where the competition is supposed to crank into an entirely higher gear. This is where the training wheels come off. Every single mistake from this second onward is fatal. The tension is supposed to be thick enough to cut with a knife, and the drama is supposed to go through the roof. But if you panned the cameras away from the pitch and looked up into the stands, you didn't see fans biting their nails. You didn't see people jumping on their seats in absolute agony or ecstasy. Instead, you saw something completely unprecedented for a World Cup knockout game. People were falling asleep. Genuinely, literally nodding off in the middle of the stadium. Fans who had paid thousands of dollars for tickets, flights, and hotels were using their jerseys as pillows, shutting their eyes under the warm California sun. Why? Because what they were forced to watch on that pitch for about 92 agonizing minutes was, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the most mind-numbingly, soul-crushingly boring games of professional football this tournament has ever produced. Welcome to Canada versus South Africa, a match that managed to be historic, heartwarming, and a complete unmitigated snooze fest all at once. And buried directly inside that massive contradiction lies a real structural crisis for FIFA, a multi-billion-dollar problem that is entirely of their own making. So before we look at the magic or the tears, let's break down the sheer disaster of this match and analyze exactly why it should have every single executive sitting in FIFA's high-tech luxury offices sweating through their expensive suits. Now, let's be entirely fair and objective here first. Because from a human perspective, both of these nations, both of these teams, and both of these fan bases had earned a genuinely beautiful, historic moment. For Canada and South Africa, just walking out of that tunnel and hearing their national anthems echo across a knockout stadium wasn't just a game, it was pure history. Let's look at the context. Before this historic tournament, Canada had only ever played 6 World Cup games across their entire national existence. The record? They lost all 6. They hadn't just failed to win a game, they had never even scored a single, solitary goal in a World Cup tournament. On the other side of the pitch, South Africa's footballing history wasn't much different on the big stage. Despite all their passion and talent, Bafana had never once in their entire history made it past the grueling group stage of a World Cup. So, try to put yourself in the shoes of a Canadian or a South African fan. Simply seeing your country's flag flying in the round of 16, knowing that you are 90 minutes away from a potential World Cup quarter-final, was arguably the greatest, most monumental moment in the footballing history of both nations. That part of the story is beautiful. It is wonderful. It is exactly the kind of underdog fairy tale that football romanticizes, and quite frankly, it's the kind of story that sports creators love to talk about. But here is the deeply uncomfortable truth that nobody in the mainstream media wants to say out loud. Here is the reality check that everyone is dancing around. When you take 2 footballing nations whose ultimate dream was simply to qualify and just get here, and then you put those 2 exact teams against each other in a sudden death, high-stakes knockout match, you do not automatically get great legendary football. In fact, most of the time, you get the exact opposite. You get 2 sides who are utterly, completely terrified of losing. You get 2 teams whose entire tactical identity instantly shrinks into survival mode. They aren't playing to win, they are playing not to die. They park the bus, they clog the passing lanes, they cling on for dear life, and they pray to the football gods that they can drag the match out for 120 minutes and survive on the lottery of a penalty shootout. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is precisely the tactical nightmare we were forced to watch. The post-match media reports from journalists on the ground didn't even attempt to sugarcoat it. They described the encounter as a sloppy, sleepy, incredibly scrappy affair that was dangerously low on technical quality. From the very first whistle, it became glaringly obvious that South Africa had arrived at the stadium with one singular clear-cut master plan: survive. Do not concede. drag this game to penalties by any means necessary. They sat incredibly deep, creating a suffocating low block that compressed the space between their midfield and defense into a tight, impenetrable wall. They willingly surrendered the ball, soaked up endless amounts of pressure, and leaned heavily on a backline that, to their absolute credit, defended with heroic, desperate intensity. Let's actually walk through the tactical footage, because even the lack of action tells a profound story. Canada dominated the possession, huffing and puffing, moving the ball from left to right, but they lacked the creative spark or the technical precision to break through the South African wall. Every time Canada tried to string together a dangerous combination in the final third, the ball would bounce off a heavy touch, or a South African defender would fly in with a desperate block. There were moments of genuine, heart-stopping individual heroism, of course. Mbukazi pulled off a spectacular, breathless goal line clearance, throwing his entire body on the line to deny Jonathan David what looked like a completely open net. Moments later, South Africa's star goalkeeper, Ronwen Williams, proved exactly why he is considered a national hero, pulling off save after save, punching away looping crosses, and commanding his box like a man possessed. Canada pressed and pressed, but it was hollow dominance. They created almost nothing of real, undeniable quality. The game was stagnant, a tactical gridlock where ambition went to die. And then came the inevitable injection of controversy. Richie Larrière made a driving run into the penalty box, felt a clip on his ankle, and went down clutching his leg. The Canadian players swarmed the referee. The stadium erupted. On social media, refereeing experts and former officials were instantly, genuinely split down the middle. Some argued it was a stonewall, undeniable penalty that both the on-field referee and the VAR room completely missed. Others claimed it was a soft simulation, a desperate attempt to win a game that neither team could win with open play. But the whistle stayed silent. The VAR check passed without an intervention, and the game simply continued its sluggish, painful march toward what everyone in the stadium assumed would be a goalless, nerve-shredding penalty shootout. The one single bright spark in this entire 90-minute desert of entertainment was the long-awaited arrival of Canada's undisputed superstar, Alphonso Davies. He was brought off the bench in the 75th minute after spending months on the sidelines due to a severe injury. The moment his boots touched the grass, you could feel the energy in the stadium shift. He immediately lifted the tempo, using his blistering pace to stretch the tired South African low block, creating a couple of half-chances out of absolutely nothing. But even the star power of a Bayern Munich winger couldn't single-handedly rescue what had been a technical grind for almost the entire match. It was a tactical slog, an exhibition of fear over flair. And then, because football is beautiful, unpredictable, and cruel, the match ended with a genuine, undeniable moment of pure magic. We were deep into stoppage time, the second minute of added time to be exact. The referee was already looking at his watch. A desperate, hopeful cross was floated into the South African box. A tired defender leaped into the air but couldn't clear it. The ball bounced awkwardly off his header and dropped perfectly to the feet of Steven Eustáquio, right at the top of the 18-yard box. In one fluid, breathless motion, Eustáquio chested the ball down, composed himself, and absolutely smashed a ferocious right-footed volley across the face of goal, tucking it inside the far post. 1-0. The stadium exploded into pure chaos. The entire Canadian bench stormed the pitch, piling on top of Eustáquio in an absolute frenzy of joy. On the other side, South African players completely collapsed onto the grass in floods of tears, knowing their heroic defensive stand had been broken at the absolute last second. Canada had done it. They had won their first ever World Cup knockout game, reaching the final 16 for the first time in their sporting history. It was a moment that their manager, Jesse Marsh, would later passionately call the definitive work of Canadian sporting heroes. So yes, the match had a spectacular cinematic ending. But let's step back and look at the bigger picture. One brilliant, lightning-in-a-bottle volley in the 92nd minute does not completely erase 91 minutes of continuous torture. It does not undo the reality of thousands of fans literally dozing off under the California sun, And that specific contrast is exactly where we arrive at FIFA's actual, massive institutional problem. Let's take the emotion out of the equation for a second and look at this situation with cold, hard seriousness. This exact scenario, this exact dip in footballing quality, is the precise trade-off that analytical football minds have been warning the public about for years. And now, the chickens have finally come home to roost right on the pitch. Make no mistake, we all absolutely love an authentic underdog story. Whether it's Cape Verde pulling off a tactical masterclass, Congo defying the odds, or the pure, unadulterated magic of a tiny, underfunded nation punching above its weight class to reach the knockout rounds of a global tournament. That is the soul of international football. It is genuinely beautiful. It inspires millions of children, and nobody is trying to take that magic away from them. But there is a massive fundamental structural difference between having one or two plucky, passionate minnows crashing an elite party and having an entire knockout bracket stuffed to the brim with smaller nations playing defensive chess against each other. Because when two teams who are simply happy to be at the tournament meet in a high-stakes, single-elimination match, the style of football you get is almost always cautious, fearful, risk-averse, and frankly dull. And to be perfectly clear, that is not a personal insult directed at the players of Canada or the coaching staff of South Africa. They did exactly what they were supposed to do to maximize their chances of winning. It is simply the objective, psychological reality of what happens to the game of football when survival, rather than tactical ambition, becomes the entire mindset of both teams on the pitch. So, how did we get here? Let's connect the dots to find out why all these low-tier knockout matchups are suddenly taking over the biggest tournament on Earth. The answer lies directly in FIFA's boardroom. FIFA explicitly decided to expand this World Cup tournament from its classic, highly competitive 32-team format to a massive, bloated 48-team format. And let's stop pretending otherwise. The driving, motivating force behind that historic expansion was never the romance of the sport. It was never about developing football in emerging markets or giving the underdogs a global platform. That was just the public relations script they fed to the media. The real driving force was pure, unadulterated corporate greed. It was money. Let's look at the raw mathematical data of this expansion. More teams fundamentally means more matches. Instead of the tight premium 64-game tournament that we grew up watching, this expanded format crams a staggering 104 matches into the schedule. And in the world of sports entertainment, more games translates directly into a massive avalanche of revenue. We are talking about hundreds of thousands of additional ticket sales, billions of dollars in extra broadcasting rights across new territories, massively inflated corporate sponsorships, and an unprecedented amount of pure cash flowing directly into FIFA's bank accounts. That was the whole point of the restructuring. They widened the gates of the tournament to maximize their financial revenue, and then they masterfully sold it to the global public as a beautiful humanitarian effort to give every single nation a fair chance at glory. But here is the massive catch that FIFA completely failed to advertise on their promotional banners. When you let that many more teams into a premium tournament, you inevitably let in a high volume of sides whose absolute developmental ceiling is that they are simply thrilled to just qualify and be there. If you stack enough of those exact teams into the prestigious knockout rounds through formatting seeding, you get exactly what we just witnessed in California. You take a marquee, opening knockout match, the showcase game that is meant to launch the most exciting phase, and it turns into a 92-minute live lullaby. FIFA successfully engineered a system to get more games for more money, but what they are quickly realizing is that more games does not automatically mean more good games. Canada versus South Africa was a flashing, glaring neon sign pointing directly at that exact institutional problem. Think about exactly what is at stake for FIFA here on a commercial level. The World Cup is not just a sports tournament. It is supposed to be the single greatest television product on the face of the planet. FIFA has sold billions of dollars in rights to global broadcasters based on one absolute promise, that this tournament prints high-octane drama, world-class entertainment, and unforgettable sporting narratives. But if the immediate price of cramming in more teams is that a significant percentage of those matches become borderline unwatchable, then FIFA has a massive, existential quality control problem. Imagine an entire knockout round filled with matches like this one. Picture a bracket where 4 or 5 different games consist of 2 defensive, terrified teams grinding out painful 0-0 draws after 0-0 draws. The hardcore national fans will always watch out of loyalty, but the billions of casual neutral viewers tune in specifically for the elite spectacle. And if the elite spectacle continuously puts them to sleep before dinner, that is a catastrophic look for a multi-billion-dollar competition. Now, to be completely fair to the other side of this argument, we have to admit that the group stage of this expanded tournament was actually genuinely thrilling. We saw historic shocks everywhere. We saw established footballing giants getting bloodied and bruised by smaller nations. The critics who confidently predicted that a 48-team expansion would completely ruin the group stage were objectively proven wrong. The group stage worked. But as any tactician will tell you, the knockout rounds of a World Cup are an entirely different beast. In a knockout game, the tactical margins are razor thin, the psychological fear of failure is infinitely greater, and the gap in technical quality gets completely exposed. Canada versus South Africa was the very first real structural test of this new format's knockout stage, and it was a grueling, painful slog. So, where exactly does all of this land us? The Canadian national team got their beautiful, well-deserved fairy tale, and the South African team can go home with their heads held incredibly high. The real disaster is the structural system that FIFA built completely around them. The underdog magic of international football is a very real, beautiful thing. But as we just saw, there is always a steep bill that comes with it, and FIFA just received their very first official invoice. Was this tactical nightmare just one isolated bad game? Or is this bloated format about to flood our screens with an entire knockout round full of unwatchable snoozers? Drop your definitive take in the comments section below. Let's get a massive debate going, and make sure you stick around and subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.